let's move on to today's top stories. Every day we try to bring one local official to provide insights into how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting our area.
This time we spoke to Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who answered some questions about the CARES Act. We'll send it over to 13 News anchor James Stratton and Congressman Kinzinger.
Joining me now, Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who represents Illinois' 16th District. Congressman, thanks for taking the time to join us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with something a lot of people are talking about today, particularly the CARES Act 2.0, but I want to start with the first CARES Act and more relief for small businesses. You said in a statement when the original CARES Act passed a few weeks ago that it wasn't perfect. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, you look at it and you see some of the, I guess, earmarks that came out, $25 million for the Kennedy Center. I think there's some shortfalls in some of the unemployment issues. There's some shortfalls and some funding for the medical side of the house. But, whenever you do a bipartisan thing, you're never going to have a bill that you consider perfect. And so that's where we're at. So hopefully we can get a new one done. I know negotiations are continuing that can fill in some of those gaps, but it's never going to be anything perfect, and especially when you're in a situation that's as frankly tragic as we are today.
Part of that is the Paycheck Protection Program ran out of money fairly quickly. That new deal you mentioned expected to bring in $310 million more. Do you support expanding the Paycheck Protection Program?
Yeah, I think it needs to be. I mean, again, right now money is basically being borrowed at 0% interest from Americans. So it's the right time to do it if you have to do something like this. Adding debt isn't great. But the best analogy I use is it's like if the roof in your house is collapsing, even if you're in debt, you're going to take out a credit card and fix the roof, because if it does collapse, I mean, it's unrecoverable at that point. That's where we're at. A virus by no fault of our own is here. We had to shut down the economy by no fault of our own. We need to keep as much of it on idle as we can and reopen as quickly as we safely can.
I want to talk about reopening in a little bit, but we see today that some chain restaurants, Shake Shack being one of them, Potbelly, another one, getting millions of dollars that were allocated to small businesses. Some small businesses here in Rockford that couldn't get money maybe could have gotten money if those businesses didn't get that money. How do we make sure that money is allocated to the small businesses, the actual small businesses that need it?
Yeah, I'm hoping there's protection in this next bill, whatever that looks like. I mean, part of the problem is when you have basically finite resource and you have such a demand, it ends up being the big banks that can file the paperwork quicker than the community banks, for instance, or the big companies that can get enough people on filling out the paperwork to get it in time. And of course, if you're first in line, you're first to get the money. So that's why it's important right now for us to plus up this fund. We should have done this 2 weeks ago. We could have done it on something called unanimous consent, but it was held up by my friends on the other side of the aisle. Let's just get it done, move on. We can worry about the politics later, but make sure those small businesses are protected. Again, when the federal government rolls out something this big in such a short amount of time, it's not going to be perfect. But we have to get as close to perfect as we can right now because we can't afford to lose it. Yeah, the biggest stimulus bill we've ever seen. When it comes to a CARES Act 2.0, rather, what do you want to see in that bill? Does that include funding to state and local governments and potentially another stimulus check to individual Americans? Well, I think it should, but I think all those are going to come later. I don't think this is the end of the stimulus train, unfortunately, right now. And this will be the Paycheck Protection Program plussed up. I think there's going to be around, I'm hearing $90 billion or so for hospitals, for healthcare providers, for more testing and PPE, those issues we hear about so much. And then, of course, plussing up that payroll protection program. And then all the other stuff, I think that'll come later. More state and local government support will probably come in yet another package. There's Illinois is in a lot of need. Illinois local governments are in a lot of need. And I would encourage Illinois state legislators right now to start talking about some of the reforms they're going to have to implement, because Illinois state government was running massive deficits when the economy was amazing. And now it's going to be in a bad place. They need to have those conversations now, because the federal bailout train's not going to be coming, permanently for these structural problems in Illinois. You mentioned fixed businesses right now. Does the further down the line stimulus include another individual stimulus check in your eyes? It could. I know the president's pushing for a payroll tax cut. I know there's talks about another check. We'll see. I think in the long term, if it's needed, we'll do it for sure. But the best stimulus we can do is get to a point where this curve is flattened, it's reducing, We can find treatments for COVID-19. We can contact test, and we can get people back to work. There is no government program or government check that can replace a good economy. And every day that goes by, this economy begins to kind of falter a little bit. So let's do that. Let's focus on testing so that we can reopen as safely as we can, as quickly as we can, the right way.
That leads me to my next question perfectly. When and how does the economy reopen, both right here in Illinois and in your district and across our country?
Well, I think, look, I'm not in the attack the governor or the president mode. I think we just need to get through this. I think the governor should look at different options. First off, urban areas where there's a lot of people, for instance, like the city of Chicago, does not necessarily need to be treated the same as a town of 500 people. So I think the governor needs to, at some point soon, maybe after May 1st, begin to look at parts of Illinois and open up parts, even if you can't open up, for instance, the city of Chicago. We need to continue to get that testing going. I know a lot of local healthcare providers are actually having to go get their testing done through Wisconsin. That's not a federal government issue. That's a state of Illinois issue because the tests are there. In those cases, the labs can't process them. So we need to get that contact, the testing together, and ultimately see who has the antibodies and that thing, the antibodies testing, which is being rolled out hopefully faster than we saw in the past with the other tests.
We saw some mayors in Winnebago County issue a sort of letter to the government, or to the governor rather, asking a regional approach to open up. That's something that you sounded like you were supporting right there. You think the rest of Illinois should open up sooner than maybe the city of Chicago?
You know, look, I'm not going to be the guy that sits here and says I have the expertise and these regions should or shouldn't, but I do think you can't paint all of Illinois with one brush. We all know, as people that, are from downstate Illinois, basically, or not Chicago, that in many cases they treat the rest of people outside of Chicago the same as the city. There may be a point at which restrictions in areas outside of Chicago, for instance, need to be lifted a little bit. The governor has the best knowledge to do that. He has the experts, so I'm not going to tell him how to do it. But I certainly think it's something he needs to look at, because we can't just say, since the city of Chicago or certain areas have outbreaks, that we have to basically put people, in some cases, 4 hours away near the state of Kentucky under the same rules.
You mentioned in a Facebook post Thursday, I believe it was, that COVID-19 may have originated at a Chinese research center. It's kind of inconclusive on that. National Institute of Health says that's not true. That happened in the natural, it happened naturally. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo seems to be investigating it. Which is it? Did it start naturally or did it start man-made?
Well, I think we'll find out. There's a couple of things that we know. Nobody's made, at least I haven't made the accusation that this was invented by China as a bioweapon. But one of the things that there seems to be a significant amount of evidence pointing towards is that they were studying coronavirus and it got out and they hid it. Now, keep this in mind. One thing we do know, regardless of where this originated, is when this broke out in Wuhan province in China, they banned all domestic flights from Wuhan, but not international flights. And 8,000 people from Wuhan, China a day came to the west coast of the United States, some of them infected. It's not their fault. They didn't know it. But the Chinese Communist Party, that's taken advantage of very innocent and very good people in China, is mistreating their people. And there have to be answers to these questions. We know it started there. Whether it was in a lab or natural, we'll find out. But we do know they've hid it. They bought up all the PPE, which is why it's expensive. And in fact, in some cases, sold PPE that was donated to them back to the countries that donated it for a profit.
All right, Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thank you for all of your help and for taking time out of your day to join us here on 13 WREX. We appreciate it.
You bet. Anytime.